Some of these failures are indicative of institutions chosen in early periods of democratization. Perhaps PR systems with low thresholds allow for too easy entrance of radicals, or presidential systems make it too easy to consolidate power in a new non-democratic regime. The questions we're going to explore now are: what institutions are best for democratizing states? To what degree, if any, is culture an important variable in deciding which institutions should be adopted in a given state as well? That's not something I'm going to handle head on, but it's something that you should think about, and I may throw a discussion question out so that you can combine some of the earlier lessons with today. So we can talk about two basic types of constitutional design: majoritarian and consensus. By majoritarian, we're talking about plurality systems leading to a two-party system, one-party government, and executive dominance. Okay, so plurality, whoever has the most gets in system. By a consensus system, we're talking about a PR system, so proportional representation, which leads to multiple parties and tends to, in effect, lead to coalition governments and equal executive and legislative relations. There's no dominance of one over the other. The parliamentary PR and the presidential SMD plurality systems, roughly parliamentary democracy versus presidential democracy, although I'm conflating two different things a little bit, are the sort of templates we're going to look at. So it's about party versus the individual. It's about, over here would be individual being in the presidential SMD system. Parliamentary PR would be about party. It's about first past the post over here, plurality systems, and multiple parties in the PR system. It's about who is the head of government and head of state. Right? In a parliamentary PR system, the prime minister is the head of government, and often the head of state as well. In a presidential SMD system, the president is. So while there are various mixes of systems that are possible, as those of you who have taken 260 have seen in the cases, it's typical that parliamentary systems are composed of legislators who are chosen by PR, and the state is run by a prime minister who's chosen by and accountable to the legislature, parliament. The typical alternative is the presidential system, where the state legislature is chosen in one election and the president, tasked with running the state, is chosen independently in different elections. Again, there are lots of mixes, but these are a couple basic templates. There are whole classes devoted to democratic institutions. Here we're just going to start you off thinking about some general pros and cons, especially in reference to transition states. This would be a good time if you haven't reviewed the stuff about PR and SMD systems in the online lectures. You need to review them again because otherwise things aren't going to make any sense. And so those are the links that I assigned before, or if I didn't, ask me for them and I'll give them to you now, but they should be out there. So according to Liepart, there are four basic goals democracies are trying to accomplish: representativeness, accountability, economic equality, and participation. Representativeness refers to how best to address different people's demands on various issues, while still ensuring that the state's governable. Which means firm leadership and effective policy making. By accountability, we're talking about rule of law. All actors within society being subject to the same rules, and that there are periodic checks on the leaders. Economic equality is about ensuring everyone has similar chances to move up. Not that everybody is at the end of the day earns the same amount, whether they work a lot or don't work a lot, but ensuring that everyone has similar opportunities to move up for mobility. And the last one, again, participation, bringing the public into the debate, affecting decisions. Now, I'll tell you, summarizing Liepart, that PR systems are empirically better with respect to participation. Voter turnout is much higher. You can pick a party that represents you. There's not as much of an issue about wasted votes, which gives you more of an incentive to go out and actually participate. We'll talk about the other three in more detail. Each one of these issues opens numerous questions. So we'll start with representation. If we define representation along who gets into power lines, the answer is fairly clear. Thinking about the electoral system in a presidential plurality SMD system, it's winner take all. So it's a zero-sum game. Half the population, maybe more, looking at our electoral college, loses. You can actually have in the United States, it's happened 3 times up till 2014 that the popular vote has actually lost the elections. In other words, someone with a majority of the popular vote has been chosen has not been chosen in place of someone who has a majority of the electoral college vote. So what this means is any sense of legitimacy, mission, and power is based on flimsy numbers. In a presidential system, a president with 51% of the popular vote, or 49% as I was just describing, can claim legitimacy. But if the legislature of the opposite party also attains 51%, which is frequently the case because voters like to hedge their bets, then there's a legitimacy dilemma. Who's really in charge? In a PR parliamentary system, you end up with, depending on the threshold, a much greater degree of representation in the legislature. And this can carry over into the government as well, as politicians create governing coalitions. Again, this consensus pattern. PR systems are empirically better at representation. You have more women represented, you're more likely to cobble together interests if there's no majority party. And so this is the empirical evidence suggests that PR systems are better for representation. But even for actors in these two different systems, these two different templates that I'm focusing on, even for these actors, there are deeper questions of representation if we define representation as rulers acting to meet the interests of the public. It's one thing to have to be demographically representative, according to an ethnic group, sex, or whatever it may be. It's something else to meet the interests of the public, right? To create policy that responds to what they demand. It's not like all women want a particular kind of policy, and all groups, all people within a given ethnic group want a particular policy. So there are two types of representation that stand out: mandate representation and accountability representation. In mandate representation, there's this notion that voters signal what they want to do, and politicians follow through and implement whatever the voters want. So parties propose policies, and citizens voice their support, or they don't, and they vote accordingly. This raises some problems in a new democracy. Parties voted in might then have to change given the situation or when they're facing different pressures, like lobbyists or something else. Voter preferences can also change given new situations. This is especially the case in a rapidly changing state, as in a newly democratizing one. You also have a question of informational cues. How do the political leaders know what voters want in the midterm, not during the election cycle, in between election cycles? You've got media, which can be underdeveloped. Public opinion barometers may be weak. So this leads to questions about how mandate representation actually works in a newly democratizing state. The second type of representation is accountability representation, where voters approve or disapprove of what was done. It's a sort of retrospective voting. So incumbents should always be thinking about what the voters want throughout their tenure in office, because they're going to get voted in or out depending on that. There are problems, especially in a new democracy. What if there's no viable alternative? You've got weakly institutionalized parties, for example, and you don't like the party that's governing, but there is no alternative that can actually gain power. Another question, what if voters lack information that might allow them to make an informed decision? Like if the government holds secret things like NSA listening on citizens, or the degree to which the intelligence community really thought that Iraq was a weapon, WMD, weapons of mass destruction holding state, and a terrorist supporting state. Information can be manipulated, I guess is the point here. And so, especially in a place where information flow isn't particularly free or isn't developed sufficiently because of all the problems we talked about before when we talked about democratizing states, this can make accountability representation more difficult. And finally, and this is for anybody, what do term limits do to this? What if you can't run for re-election? What's your incentive when we're talking about accountability representation to actually go off and do what the people want you to do?